Welcome to What the Comp, the Pay Strategy Podcast, where compensation stops being confusing and starts making sense for real organizations. I'm Jennifer Loftus, National Director at Astron Solutions. And today we're talking about market data, and more specifically, why one of the most trusted tools in compensation can quietly create some of the biggest problems. Here's the truth. Market data from quality sources isn't wrong. But if you rely on it the way most organizations do, something starts to break. Because market data doesn't tell you what to pay, it tells you what others are paying. And those are not the same thing. And if you're in human resources or finance or leading an organization, you've probably heard this. We need to be at market. But what does that mean in your organization? Who decided where market is and why that's the right place to be? Because that's where the conversation usually stops. And that's where the risk starts. So why does this happen? Why do organizations rely so heavily on market data and still struggle with pay decisions? First, we have the anchor problem. Let's start with how people use data. When you open a market survey, what's the first number most people look for? The median, 50th percentile, P50. And once that number is identified, it becomes the anchor. Everything starts to revolve around it. Offers, pay adjustments, internal comparisons. But let me ask you, how often does anyone step back and ask, is this the right anchor for us? Not just what is the number, but what should the number represent? Because once you anchor to a number without context, you lose flexibility. And you lose intent. Now, let's look at job matching, because this is where things get subtle. When roles are matched to market data, what's the basis? Job titles or responsibilities? Because two roles can have the same exact title and very different scopes, different impacts, different expectations. So when those two roles get matched the same way, the data looks clean, but the decisions just don't hold up. And this is where organizations start to feel tension, because the data says one thing, but the reality of the role says something else. Now, let's zoom out. Organizations often say, we're at market. But market relative to what? Are we talking about industry? What about geography? Organizational size? Growth stage? And more importantly, where do you want to be? Because market data gives you a range of options. But without a strategy, you default to the middle. And the middle is not always the right answer. Here's a question worth sitting with. If you removed market data entirely, would your organization still know how to make pay decisions? Or would everything slow down? Would decisions stall out? Would alignment break? Because that's the difference between using data and depending on it. So, what do you do? Because market data is important. It should be part of your process, but it shouldn't drive your strategy. First, apply your strategy in step 1. Starting Monday, make one simple shift. Apply your strategy first. Then use market data to support it, not the other way around. Because once data drives the decision, it's hard to reintroduce intent. Next, define your position first. Starting Monday, ask your team, where do we want to sit relative to the market? Not, where are we now? But rather, where should we be? And listen closely. Is the answer clear? Or does it vary depending on who's answering? Because if it varies, your decisions will too. Third, pressure test your job matching process. Starting Monday, take a closer look at how roles are matched. Ask yourself, are we matching based on job scope and responsibility, or just job title? Because small differences in scope can lead to big differences in pay. Item number 4, use ranges, not single numbers. Starting Monday, shift the conversation. Instead of asking, what's the number? Ask yourself, what's the range telling us? Because the insight is in the range spread, not the midpoint alone. So here's where we land. Market data is powerful. It's useful. It's necessary. But it's not a strategy. And if market data disappeared tomorrow, would your compensation decisions still hold up? Or would everything need to be rebuilt? Because that's the difference between using data and relying on it. If this is something you're starting to see or starting to question, you're not alone. We're having this conversation every day with organizations trying to figure it out. Why do things feel off, even when we're doing a lot of things right? Especially as we head into conversations around SHRM 26 in Orlando this June, where the topic keeps coming up again and again. I'll be speaking there, and we'll be at the Astron booth, continuing these exact conversations in real time. And if you're going to be at SHRM 26, stop by and mention the podcast. We genuinely love to meet you and hear what you're seeing in your organization. And if it's helpful, we're always happy to share what we're seeing and what's working. Thanks for listening to What the Comp. If this made you think, please send it to someone who's trying to solve the same challenge. Because if data is driving your compensation decisions without a strategy behind it, you're not leading your pay practices, you're reacting to them. This is What the Comp.